Some more of these slides to go through. Let's give it a shot. Yeah, we're nearly to the end. All right, then there's documentation. So you have to write quite a lot of documents. Your policies have to be written down, and these are mandatory. Your company has a policy for how they handle everything. You have procedures which specify exactly how to do things. You have standards. Every company has certain products. The most common thing they do is to use the Microsoft everything, because you have a Microsoft domain controller and you have Microsoft servers, and therefore you use Office and everything else because it all works together really well. Then you have guidelines and baselines. Guidelines are recommendations, and baselines are just measurements of your current security posture, so you can compare it after you make a change, see how it has changed. So your security, you have policies, processes, procedures, standards, guidelines, and baselines. And so the policies are a strategic, big plan. And above that, by the way, you have a company mission. Like Google's mission is to index all the world's information. You have a really simple statement like that specifying what your company is for. But then you have security policies. And these will assign responsibilities, specify your audit and compliance, how you're going to enforce things, and what acceptable risk levels are. Beginners always say, I want the risk to be zero. And I say, well, you might want that, but you're not going to get it. So you have to be realistic. There's no such thing as 100% uptime, and there's no such thing as zero risk. You can lower risk to some level, but you can't ever achieve perfection. And so you have policies at the top, then you'll have various other policies and categories, small policies, issue-specific ones, advisory policies, informative policies, ones about regulatory compliance, and so on. So the organizational ones apply to the whole organization, and then there's issue-specific ones like email, privacy, employee termination, and ones specific to certain systems, regulatory ones, which go to the legal requirements of your business, and advisory ones. Most policies are advisory, most of them are not mandatory. And there's informative ones that provide background information. So processes are a series of steps required to do things. This is what I did in my first financial business. When I went in there, they didn't have anything written down. So I wrote down procedures for all the things that had to be done, so I could remember it myself, and that started them, being more mature in this regard. There was just one guy that knew how to do things, and everything was in his head, and that wasn't acceptable. I wrote down the step-by-step procedures for how to clean the junk off the email server so it would stay up, and many other things. So you have the security procedures saying exactly what you have to do things like put in a new HTTPS certificate and so on. And you have standards, requirements where you say what we use here. We use this brand of antivirus and nothing else. We use this brand of word processor and nothing else, that sort of thing. And then guidelines are not compulsory. These are recommendations how to get things done. And there's baselines that just measure the current state of a system so you can compare it to a later state. All right, and so let's try another one of these Kahoots. 1F is here, good. All right. Good, we're on track. I tried to teach my Android security course in China. That was a mistake. They blocked everything. Everything Google is blocked. Everything Android is blocked. So we spent about a half hour trying to do that. When I said, all right, forget it. We're going to do Splunk. And they didn't get mad at me. We totally did a different topic because nothing worked. I thought I had a workaround and it didn't work. So, I appreciate them being tolerant of some flexibility. I've done that a few times, so I just totally change a talk or a class when I get there. No one's gotten too mad. When Stuxnet came out, I was on an airplane when they exposed how Stuxnet worked, and when I arrived at the conference, I totally threw away my talk and showed them how Stuxnet worked, because that was more important. But people don't get mad as long as they see something good. Anyway. All right, so where do you find your step-by-step instructions? Like I say, this is the management stuff, not hands-on technical. This is the CISSP, the kind of thing. All right, that's a procedure. All right. What's the most common policy? Advisory policies. Nobody got it right. That's all right. Most policies are advisory. And which policy enforces compliance with a standard? Those are the regulatory policies. All right, good. Lola's doing very well. All right. We got a little bit more, and we got plenty of time to finish by 7:30. So I mentioned before business continuity. This is a big deal. This is how you're going to handle a disaster. If you have an earthquake or a fire or a pandemic where a bunch of people get sick and they can't go to work, how are you going to deal with it? You have to have a plan. And you'll have a lot of plans underneath it, in particular the disaster recovery plan. So the disaster recovery plan is tactical and short-term. It'll be something like having an alternative set of servers or an alternative location you can do business out of for a while. A business impact analysis is part of planning this, where what you do is you figure out how long you could survive without a certain part of your business. So, for example, you know, if you're an internet business, your website probably has to be up all the time. It's not okay for it to be down for more than an hour, but you're billing customers, and that might be able to be down for like a week or two without really impairing your business too much, that sort of thing. So you'll have your NIST has a whole bunch of publications for this, a contingency planning policy, business impact analysis, then you identify preventive controls and contingency strategies and a contingency plan, and then you have testing, training, and exercises of your plan. If you don't test it, then when a disaster hits, you'll find out it's out of date. And then you have to maintain your plan. You have to constantly update it to deal with the changes in your network, the changes in your staff, and the changes in your business. So then there's personnel policies. These are often neglected. I saw a statistic a couple of years back that said 75% of resumes now contain lies. And I know in the first Trump administration, there were a bunch of scandals where people were in charge of something and it turned out they didn't really have the degrees they claimed to have. So apparently a lot of people are neglecting this, but this is candidate screening. And you have the code of conduct and acceptable use policy and all this jazz. And you're supposed to be verifying the claims they make on their resume, calling those companies to make sure they really worked there, you know. So onboarding, you give them orientation and provisioning, and when you offboard them, you're going to have an exit interview where you reclaim all the hardware, like the laptop you gave them, and you prevent them from taking confidential company data out. One of my guest speakers worked at a major company, and he said he was the guy that searched people to find where they were smuggling data out, and he said he never fails to find it. They're all trying to smuggle out stuff from this company to give the next company. So in order to prevent people from committing fraud on the job rotation and separation of duties help. Job rotation is where people have to move from one position to another. So if somebody has worked out a scam where they can steal the money, they get moved to another location, and the next person comes in, and they can see the books and everything, what's happening, and so that will help to detect fraud. And separation of duties requires two people to sign off on something important. The company I worked at distributed a lot of money in checks, and no distribution of any kind could go out without two people signing off on it. The database analyst, which was like me, would prepare it, and then it had to be audited and checked by a financial guy who would approve it before any checks went out. That's the kind of thing you have. Two eyes look at it. That way, nobody can make a mistake or do something crooked without getting caught, is the idea. All right, so here's some risk management concepts. So you have, it's a circle, like I say. So for example, you define your assets, the things you need to protect. Then you figure out what the possible weak spots are. Those are your exposures. Then you consider what safeguards would protect them. You consider what people might attack you and what their motivations are. Those are threat agents, and threats are the possible ways they could hurt you. Vulnerabilities are the weaknesses they come in through, and when you quantify those are risks, hopefully boiled down to how many dollars per year we're going to lose, and then you can figure out how many dollars per year to spend on a safeguard. So you go around a circle here. All right, and so risk assessment, you determine your assets, you determine the threat is a bad thing that might happen, a vulnerability is a weakness that might permit a threat to hurt you, and a risk is when you boil it down to a quantification. One very common flaw is your CEO goes through the airport and they see a sign saying companies got hurt by fishing or something, so then he decides you have to do something about fishing. This is responding to a threat. You should not respond to a threat because you haven't yet determined whether it's worth it. You have to respond to a risk. You have to evaluate the threats and determine how vulnerable you are and how much it will really hurt you, and then you decide how much is it worth preventing. Many things you just let them happen. Like your employees are probably stealing small things from the office like pens and paper clips, and it's not worth the bother to prevent it. It's such a small amount of damage, any attempt to lock it up would probably just not be worth it. That's the thing. You accept a lot of risks. So for example, in Boston, earthquakes are rare, but the buildings are vulnerable. In San Francisco, earthquakes are common, but the buildings are safer, so the total earthquake risk is the same. The total amount of dollars per year you expect to lose to earthquakes. So impact is how much you're going to have of the damage. And of course, most of us regard human life as infinite impact. That's totally unacceptable. The only people that can accept that is the military. But all of us in the private sector can't accept killing people. And usually you can't boil these things down to dollars. All you can do is sort of rate them into high, medium, and low. So if you have insignificant consequences and it's almost certain to happen, then that's here. If you have something that has catastrophic, but it's extreme or high risk here, even if it's a rare activity, you determine what the consequences are and how likely it is to happen, and then you rate it as like high, medium, low, or I guess extreme. That's usually where you're at, a qualitative statement like that. So you have the asset value. The exposure factor is how much of the asset would be lost if the bad thing happened. Like you have cars, and the cars might get in an accident, and maybe that would cost half the cost of the car to repair it. So that's your single loss expectancy. Then annual rate of occurrence is how many of those things you expect to happen per year, and that gives you the total amount of damage per year you expect to have. And therefore, that's the amount of money you should be willing to spend to prevent it. That's the idea. So you get the total cost of ownership. This is something Microsoft always talks about. People say, I could just get Linux and OpenOffice and not pay Microsoft. They say, yeah, you could, and what you'll find is your staff has a much more trouble. It's hard to find staff that are trained. It's hard to, you can't interoperate with other businesses. It's hard to put on the updates. You don't have enough features you need, and the total cost of ownership is not really lower. You didn't pay for the software, but you pay for other things. Whereas if you just get the standard Microsoft product, then it's easy to get people that are Microsoft certified and things will be smoother. That's the thing. Consider all the costs. That's total cost of ownership. And then you can try to have return on investment. This is a weak spot of security. Other things like advertising, business managers love because they can measure how much more sales they have, and they can say, well, we spent this much on the ad, we got this many more sales, that was our return on investment. But if you upgrade your security, you just prevent getting hacked, so something doesn't happen. You don't seem to have gained anything, right? We didn't sell any more products. We spent all this money and didn't sell any more products. So it's hard to justify. You just have to tell them, to sell them something like fear, but that's the problem. Cybersecurity in general lacks from a clear return on investment. We can't really say exactly how many dollars we're saving them with our security measures. So here's your choices. You can accept the risk, do nothing, and let it happen. You can mitigate it, put in some kind of control to lower it. You can transfer it to somebody else by like outsourcing or buying insurance, or you can avoid the risk by changing your process so that doesn't happen anymore. You no longer do that risky activity. Quantitative analysis would be nice, where you actually know how many dollars are in the risks. Usually you can't do it. You just have some simple categories like high, medium, and low. So here's the NIST management framework, where you start here, you categorize your systems, then you select security controls, implement them, you assess to see how well it worked, then you, I'm not sure what the authorization is, but you monitor them, see how well they're working, and then you go around the circle. So very much like all the others. So controls, your types of controls: preventive controls prevent an attack, detective controls detect an attack without preventing it, like a security camera, corrective controls repair damage caused by an attack, and recovery controls are similar. Deterrent controls scare away the bad guy without really preventing it, like a sign that says guard dog when there is no dog. And compensating controls compensate for the weakness of another control. So you got them here. All right. And so recovery restores functionality after a security incident, and corrective corrects a damaged system or process. Those are quite similar. And deterrent scare away people. Compensating controls compensate for weakness in another control. All right, and then you have administrative, technical, and physical securities. Administrative are business processes like policies, procedures, and regulations. Technical controls are the ones you think of, like firewalls and antivirus and logins and that sort of thing, technical things. And physical, of course, locks and security guards, fences, just to control physical movement of people. So you also do threat modeling. You can either focus on your application and say what could hurt it, you can focus on your asset and say what could hurt it, or you could start with the attacker, who's going to attack us, and then what are they likely to do. These are all fine ways. Different companies use different policies, different ways of doing this, but you have to have some way of modeling what bad things could happen. Microsoft has the STRIDE threat categorization. It's a acronym, so it's spoofing, tampering, repudiation. Repudiation is when you deny what you've done. If you don't have good logs, people can do a bad thing and then deny they've done it. If you have good logs, people cannot deny later what they've done. Information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege, those are a way to categorize the possible threats. There are other ones too. And so here's STRIDE, PASTA, TRIKE, and VAST, and a way to compare them. STRIDE is older and simpler and doesn't check as many of the boxes, like encouraging collaboration among all stakeholders and so on. It's simpler, but a lot of companies I worked for used STRIDE. They didn't want to get into this complicated stuff. Anyway, and then we mentioned supply chain risks. You're buying stuff, you're buying software, you're buying hardware, and all those things might bring in flaws and problems. So you have to have monitoring your third party that you trust, and have service level agreements where there's what they promise to do is defined, so you can demand service and audit to make sure they're implementing proper security measures, and if necessary, sue them for failure to provide service up to the service level they promised. So, one more of these, and that's it. 1G is here. All right. All right, maybe we got enough people. All right, so what is a warning sign? That's a deterrent. Scares away some attackers, but doesn't actually prevent them. All right, how about an electric fence? That's preventive. By the way, there is a ways through an electric fence. Nothing's ever perfect, but mostly that will stop people. And that's why there's a little fuzziness in everything. Every defense, there's a way to punch through it. You know, for every attack, there is a defense that will stop it. None of these are 100% effective. All right, how about a security camera? Technical, physical? No, technical, right. It's a technical detective control. It's equipment. Yeah, I can see why people think it's like the fence, but it's considered technical because it's an electronic device. And by the way, if this stuff seems unfair, that's good because the CISSP exam is extremely misleading and unfair. I'll get to this later. You have to take practice tests. The questions are written in a way that seems deliberately intended to drive you nuts. You have to practice. It's not like other cert exams, like Cisco exams and Microsoft exams, where just knowing the facts is all you need. Here you have to make sort of judgments based on sort of weird stories that are hard to understand. So anyway. All right, how about an acceptable use policy? That's also why these things are extra credit. You don't have to do them because they're not incredibly fair. So administrative, that's good. That's administrative. There's a policy, but there's nothing actually preventing you from breaking the policy. All right. And if risk has a high likelihood and a low impact, what should you do? Just accept it. Any attempt to prevent it is more bother than it's worth. Like, this college. Anybody could wander in. I didn't verify who you are. I don't really know if you guys are enrolled. Some random person could wander in. Doesn't matter. Wouldn't do any harm, so I don't need anything to prevent it. Anyway. All right. So you have 100 cars worth $50K each, and employees wreck 1% of them each year. So what is the ALE? You expect to lose 50K, one car per year. And therefore, that's how much you should spend on things like driver training or insurance or whatever it might be to lower the number of cars wrecked. All right. All right. JW has won twice. All right. Good. So let me stop the recording.